One thing I've always been intrigued by is the music of the Stephen King universe. He seems to talk about a lot about music in his novels. You've probably picked up on that.
Definitely, yeah. He's a long time music fan. He plays music himself. He plays guitar. He was a member of a group of writers called the Rock Bottom Remainders who played a bunch of concerts. I saw them once at the Miami Book Fair. Warren Zevon had joined them as a temporary band member. Um, he listens to music a lot when he's writing, especially first draft material, and he often writes about what he's been listening to. I know he wrote an article about how when he was finishing up the Dark Tower series, he had one song, well, actually an EP that had the same song on it but different mixes of it, that he just played over and over and over again until his wife just said, "If I hear that thing about Monica Mambo number whatever one more time, that's it." But yeah, I mean, it's a soundtrack for some of the books. Christine is a big example of that. He paid a lot of money to be able to quote lyrics that were appropriate to that era in that book.
I always
Um,
wondered about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, man, when he and Peter Straub were working together, Steve would be listening to rock and roll, and Peter would be listening to jazz, and they sort of traded that off in the book. You know, they'd make references. Steve would make a reference to jazz to make it seem like maybe Peter wrote that section, and Straub would do the same thing. Yeah, man, and it's interesting you say that. Behind me on a shelf somewhere, there's a book called Dissonant Harmonies, and it's a project that I did with Brian Keene, who's one of the co-editors of The End of the World as We Know It. Ah, you got it there. And so the concept of that book was Brian and I have known each other for years, and we share a lot of similar musical interests, but we're also very orthogonal on some others. And so the idea was we would each create a playlist for the other person to listen to while we each wrote a long story. And the stories weren't necessarily inspired by any particular song, but with that soundtrack playing all the while, the only thing you're listening to, it creates a mood or a tone or something. And so at the beginning of that book, we both discuss why we chose the songs we did for the other person, and then what our personal reactions were to the music that was given to us before we started writing. And we're going to do a follow up to that. We've already traded our playlists, and
Oh,
if you look up on Spotify, if you look up for my name or Dissonant Harmonies, you can find the playlist on Spotify.
that's amazing. And you know what else is amazing about this? This copy of Dissonant Harmonies in my hand here by Bev Vincent and Brian Keene. This is a signed copy that we're giving away. And all you have to do to be eligible for that is subscribe to All Things Unexplained and comment on a video. And you could win this signed copy by Bev Vincent of Dissonant Harmonies. So I'm so glad you brought that up. Kind of
Good
a
segue.
perfect timing, good segue. You know, Bev, I want to tell everybody, I think everybody should read The Stand, speaking of the music, and then watch somehow, I don't know how you can find it. Maybe it's on YouTube. Find the 90s miniseries, The Stand, because classic beginning,
Oh man,
it starts with Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult.
yeah,
And
and it's got that great Crowded House song, "Don't Dream It's Over" too.
yes, and you know, songs like Don't Fear the Reaper, I don't know, it has such a, I guess, 70s thing to it or 60s thing to it that I think we don't really necessarily think this is a terrifying song until you watch something like The Stand or read The Stand. And then you
Yeah.
listen to the lyrics carefully and Don't Fear the Reaper. And then all of a sudden you forget about the cowbell situation in Saturday Night Live. You're like, they're actually talking about something much more serious here. And I don't know, maybe you know, was it Steven's idea to bring Don't Fear the Reaper in that song into the miniseries, or did somebody
Yeah,
else
to be
come up with
honest,
it?
I don't know. I assumed, have always assumed it was Mick Garris who directed it. But I mean, King wrote the screenplay, so it's very possible that he could have dropped that audio cue into the screenplay. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I'm friends with Mick. I should ask him sometime.
I'd love to know exactly how that got in there. And my favorite soundtrack, personally, is from
Maximum Overdrive.
You knew. How did you know? It's much maligned, and fairly so. It has its problems, but the soundtrack ain't one of the problems because it's
Definitely.
all AC/DC. Matter of fact, maybe you could help me with that. Yeah, I think I read it before, but I have no idea because AC/DC is kinda like, weird. I've always heard with the usage of their music, like, I think it took them forever to have their music available, via things like Spotify and other things, for example, but yet somehow had all these songs on the Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive movie, which, if you forgot about that, like it had this great marketing campaign. And it was quite shocking, I remember at the time, because it said it'll scare the hell out of you. And that was like, whoa. I remember that we only had 3 channels back then in my house. And to hear that on television, it's like, what the heck? Like, earmuffs, kids, cover your ears. What are they talking about? How did they get away with that commercial? And it has I would say the main character of Maximum Overdrive is an 18-wheeler
Yes, with the Green Goblin face.
with a green goblin face. And the whole soundtrack is AC/DC. And you know what? It has some of my favorite AC/DC songs, which I still associate with Halloween. And I don't think I ever would have known them, or they would not have meant so much to me without Maximum Overdrive, like Ride On. That
Yep.
that is
Who made
such
who?
a bluesy and Who Made Who, both of them. They're this like bluesy, dark songs. They seem a little different than the typical AC/DC song. But yeah, I mean, do you know anything about Maximum Overdrive that our listeners would
Yeah,
like to know?
of course, when King directed, of course, that was the big reason why it got as much attention as it did. I mean, he'd been on the set when people were adapting his work, but it was his first experience directing. And the interesting thing was that the entire crew was Italian. And so there was a language barrier issue. It was a Dino De Laurentiis production. And so they had to have translators so we could talk to the DP and the camera operators and all of that. And he didn't understand some of the basic rules about camera motions, and they used to chastise him for, you're crossing the line, you're showing something that's going to confuse the audience. But I have to think that if Stephen King called any band up and said, you know, could I use your music, and would you even consider writing music for a movie? I can't imagine many people would turn that down. It's just, even in the 1980s, King was such a huge presence that it's going to expand your audience. People who wouldn't necessarily listen to AC/DC would listen, go see the movie and say, "Hey, that's pretty good. Who's that?" And let's go buy some of their albums. And it's a symbiotic thing, of course. AC/DC fans probably went to see the movie because of the soundtrack, and yeah, I guess that's stuff just how it works.
Maximum Overdrive, another great example of these themes we're talking about, because let's see, the world, that's some sort of comet, which or something they don't really explain in the movie, passes Earth, and then all of a sudden, all machines, especially it seems like automobiles, have a life of their own and sort of start running the world. But they need us too, right? Like to put the gas in the cars, we got this theme of isolation again, because we've got this little town, I guess, where the main I grew up in a town like this. The main pit stop was a gas station. Like that was the main part of town. And then we got these people, and it's essentially the apocalypse in Maximum Overdrive. And how do they deal with that? Bev, I read something funny about Maximum Overdrive. Somebody asked King, "When are you going to direct another movie?" And he said, "Have you seen Maximum Overdrive?"